My name's Leonard Koziansky, and I would like to talk to you today about color and light and how we look at them and use them when we're trying to make paintings. And very often we think, we're beginners, we're beginning painting. We think, well, if I'm going to paint a red apple, all I have to do is I'll take it and paint it red, and then where it's being hit by the light, the side it's being hit by the light, I'll add white, and that'll make it lighter. And then on the shadow side, I'll add black to the red, and that'll make it darker. And then I'll have an apple that looks like it's illuminated as light and shadow, and I do that, and it looks awful. It looks chalky. It's like, oh, what do I do? Well, when we set out to paint something, we have to really look at it. And learning to paint something is learning how to see it. And so we have to actually look at the color that is on the light side of that apple and mix that, and look at the color that's on the shadow side of the apple and mix that. And depending on the light, on the color of the light, it's going to determine the colors that we have on our subject. For example, well, here's look at this example here. This is a photograph. One is done on the right. Notice that it's being illuminated by a warm light, and there's no color correction. But most cameras these days, especially your cell phone cameras, they have a built-in white balance corrector, and so it compensates for the color of the light. And that's what you're seeing over there on the left side of that picture. Now, our brains do that. Our survival depends on our brains being able to do that, so that the apple that I see in the tree that I pick is going to be perceived, I'm going to perceive it as the same apple that's on my plate that I'm going to eat. Otherwise, I could, end up eating the wrong things, and I get poisoned. So it depends, our color perception depends on a certain level of consistency, and so our brain does a color correction. But cameras don't unless it's programmed into them. And here we can see that in this picture. Now, sunlight is a warm light. The sun is kind of like an orange star. And so even though the light coming from it we feel is like very white, it's actually kind of tinted an orange color. So that when it shines on a subject, the light side of that subject is going to be a little bit warmer, and then the shadow side is going to be a little bit cooler, because the sky is a blue, and so that kind of fills in the shadows with a bluish color. Now here, this is a painting by Monet of a haystack. Notice that field that the haystack is sitting in. Notice that the grass, the ground, is much warmer. It's yellowier. It's a sort of a yellow-greenish color. And the shadow side, where the cast shadow from that haystack on the ground, is cooler. It's darker, but it's also cooler in color. It's bluer. So it's not just a difference of light and dark, it's also warm versus cool. The warm colors on our palette are the yellows and reds and oranges. The cool colors are the blues and the greens and the violets. So when we want to show that a subject is being illuminated by the sun, we want to have warm light and cooler shadows. Now, that we don't want to be too different, because notice in this painting by Monet, we're still using greens. It's just that there's warmer greens and cooler greens. It's not like we're using orange, fire engine red versus robin's egg blue. Okay, so we want to have just a subtle difference, warmer versus cooler, or lighter versus darker, but we're mixing those colors specifically and deliberetely. Okay, now let's look at another painting by Monet. This is of the front of a cathedral, Rouen Cathedral. And he'd set up his easel outdoors, and he would paint this cathedral at different times of the day. And I think maybe he was in a room across the street or something. But he was actually there, painting this from life. And so when the sunlight hits the front of the cathedral, it's very warm in color. It has a yellowish tone to it. Whereas where it's in shadow, it has more of a bluish tone. And so we see a lot of blues in the shadows. But he has a little complication to this picture. Notice how there's this kind of like an orange reflected up into that main entrance of the cathedral. And that lets us know that there's probably a brick sidewalk or street in front, and the sunlight is hitting that sort of reddish orange brick and reflecting back up onto the underside of those forms. So not only do we have warm lights and cool shadows here, but we also have reflected light that's coming from somewhere else, from some other object. And when we're painting a subject, we have to pay attention to not only the light source and how the light that's illuminating the shadows, but we also have to think about what other colors are being reflected onto that object as well. Okay, so here's another painting by Monet. Now notice that grass in the foreground. Okay, it's green grass all the way across. But the grass that's being illuminated by the sun is a warmer color. It's a more of a yellowish green. And the part that's being in shadow, where the woman is casting a shadow onto the grass, that's more of a blue-green, a darker blue-green. And so we have lighter in the sunlight and darker in the shadow, but we also have warmer in the sunlight and cooler in the shadow, but it's a subtle difference. Not a big difference. It's, warmer and cooler, not yellow versus blue, but a yellowy green versus a bluish green. And so that preserves the local color of the green grass, but seeing it illuminated by in two different ways. One by the light from the sun, and the other by that fill-in light from the blue sky up above, which we can also see in the painting. And as artists, when we start to go around looking at the world and we start to see those things, and we go up to it, we're with some friends, and we're out with some friends on a snowy day, and we say, "Oh my God, look at how blue those shadows are," and they're going to look at us like we're some kind of a nut. But that's because we're learning how to see the world, to see the colors that are there. And generally, if they're not painting a subject, they're not looking at the colors closely, they're not going to see the colors as richly as you do who are painting that same subject. Okay. Now here's another painting, but this one's by Renoir, of an outdoor dance. And here the sunlight is being filtered it's coming through the leaves of the trees, and it's dappling the subject. So we have all these different subjects, all these different colors being illuminated by little dots of sunlight that's coming through the trees. Notice that the ground by those dancers, notice how that ground, how cool, how bluish it is where it's in shadow, and how warm it is. It's kind of like a yellowy, orangey color where it's being illuminated by the sun. And so then that lets us know that it's sunlight that's illuminating that, and that this is an outdoor dance, not an indoor dance. Also, another good example, you go over to that chair. You see that chair over there on the right? Now looks directly above the chair, and you're going to see a man with a straw hat on. It has a kind of like a yellow straw hat on. Now, notice that those spots that are being hit by the sun are very yellow. But notice that those areas that are in the shadow are sort of more like a grayish yellow. They're not as bright. And so we have a warmer light and cooler shadow, a lighter light and a darker shadowy area, but also a little bit warmer in color and a little bit cooler in the shadowy area. But they're still within the yellow families because he wants to maintain the fact that this is a yellow straw hat. And so he's using yellows both for the light and the shadow, but a warmer yellow for the light and a cooler light for the shadows. Now here, this is a painting by Willem Kalf. This was done a couple hundred years earlier. This is a still life with some fruit, an orange and a lemon. And the orange has a local orange color, and the lemon has a local color of yellow. But notice that this is it's not really sunlight, but it's a warm light. And so the light side of the orange is warmer, and the shadow side is cooler. And notice on the lemon, the lemon peel, that where it's being illuminated, it is a little bit warmer. And in the shadowy area, it's a little bit cooler. And so we get that warm-cool relationship as well as a light-dark relationship, which helps to create the sense of light and shadow on this still life object, which is painted with amazing detail. Well, movie directors know this too. And here's a scene. Here's a photo from the movie Titanic. And here the heroine, Rose, is on the back of the Titanic, and she's contemplating suicide. And she's going to jump off the back of the boat, and she slips, and she's hanging onto this railing. And notice that the director is using warm light on one side of her face and cool light on the shadow side. So the warm light represents the warmth and safety of the Titanic, whereas the cool light, the blue light that's coming in from the other side, represents nighttime, coldness, water, despair. And so he's helping to create an emotional tension in this scene by the use of light. The director is using light to help to create a sense of mood and a sense of emotional tension in this scene. And he's also creating a sense of light and shadow. So we have the warm light on the light side of her face, and a cool light on the shadow side. Now remember, this was not shot outside. This was done in a studio. So they are deliberately using blue lights on the shadow side and warm lights on the light side. Here's another scene from that movie. Again, shot in a studio. Notice how blue the light is that's shining on her as she's facing out into the darkness. And how warm the light is that's filling in from behind from the Titanic, giving us this contrast of not just light and shadow, but of emotional tension, of safety versus despair. Now here, this is a painting by Caravaggio, and this is an angel appearing to the apostle St. Matthew, inspiring him to write the Gospel of Matthew. And Caravaggio, when he's painting this, he's not outside. I mean, this is supposed to be like a celestial light shining down on this angel, but it's being done in a studio, probably with a skylight. And so we don't see that same warm, dark, warm versus cool difference in the light and shadow. In fact, the lights look kind of cool, and the shadows look, fairly warm. So, maybe this is a studio with a skylight, and it's that blue skylight that's illuminating his subject. And so we do have light versus shadow, but we don't have the same color differences that we saw in those Monet or Renoir paintings. Now here, this is a painting by Bouguereau. This was done in the late 19th century, and this is supposed to be outside. Okay, this is the infants, Cupid and Psyche, and they're little cherubs, and it's supposed to be outside, but notice that the lights are very cold, very cool in color, and the shadows are much warmer in color. And so obviously, this is being done in a studio. Now, the Impressionists who went outside to paint, they thought that this was kind of dishonest. And but at the time, here, let's look at that Monet again. At the time, in the Victorian era, it was felt that, pale skin, women's skin should be very pale in color. We have just the opposite attitude. In fact, you go around and you see there tanning salons all over the place. So a suntan look is considered attractive. But back then it wasn't. And so women, when they went out in the sun, would carry a parasol so that they wouldn't get a tan. Okay, but notice that because this woman is outdoors, being illuminated by the sun, we have the warm lights and cool shadows. And artists at the time said, well, this is more honest. This is the way we really live. We don't live in skylight illuminated studios where, we're walking around outside. And so the art and the Impressionist artists, they took their easels and they took their paint outside to paint. And they felt that was more honest, more truthful. And this was made possible by a major technical advance, which was being able to put paint in tubes. Okay, before that, if you wanted paint, you had to go to a chemist or an apothecary, have them mix up a pot of paint for you, and then you would use it for as long as you could. And now artists had tubes of paint that they could take outside, and so they could paint outside, and they felt that they should do that because it was more truthful, more honest, and gave them much more lifelike pictures. And when we look at these Impressionist paintings, they have a very lively, lifelike look to them. They're very natural, and a sense of life to them, which the other paintings, as expertly, we saw that Bouguereau, that was expertly painted, beautifully drawn, but it didn't have the truthful quality that this painting by Monet has. Now here, this is a painting by Philip Pearlstein. This was done very recently. This was done, about in the 1980s, about 50 years ago. 40 years ago. And what Pearlstein, he said, look, in our indoor spaces, we have these fluorescent lights. We have these banks of fluorescent lights. And that makes everybody look kind of pasty and cold. And it does. That fluorescent light is kind of like a purpley light. And so people that are illuminated, faces and figures illuminated by that, have this kind of like cold, pasty look to them. So Pearlstein says, well, that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm going to paint. And so we look at this picture and, it looks kind of, the people look kind of ugly and lifeless. But notice the cast shadows on the wall from their feet. Notice the multiple shadows. So he's letting us know that this subject is being illuminated by more than one light source. It's not just the sun, or it's not just a skylight. It's, these banks of fluorescent lights that are making everybody look kind of cold and pasty, and the shadows kind of confusing because the light is coming from multiple sources. Now, okay. You want to see one of my pictures? Okay, I know people have been asking, show us one of your pictures. Okay, I'll show you one of mine. This one's called Isolation, and it's tempera on panel. And here I'm using a warm light and cool shadows to create a nighttime effect. Now, this is called Isolation. I painted this, I got this idea during the COVID period when we were fairly isolated. And so here we have a warm light coming out of a window, shining onto the grass. And here the grass is more of a light yellowy green, whereas in the shadows it's more of a blue-green, a darker blue-green. And by having a real strong contrast between the light and the shadow areas, I'm creating the effect of nighttime. And so the side of the house is very dark, and the inside of the house is very light and warm, letting us know that it's being illuminated by artificial illumination that's spilling out onto the lawn. And so this helps me to create a sense of light and shadow and create a sense of nighttime in this painting. Now, thank you for watching this video about the use of light and the use of color when we're painting, and using the color of the light to help us figure out what colors we should paint our subjects. And not thinking that we can just, add some white to one side and some black to the other and we're going to get light and shadow. That's not going to work. And we can see that. Our paintings look awful when we try that. So we have to observe the colors. And we have to observe the colors knowing what the color of the light is that's illuminating our subject. Is it sunlight? Is it skylight? How about if it's a cloudy day? That light is a lot colder on a cloudy day, so maybe on a cloudy day we get cool lights and warm shadows. Well, we have to observe those colors. And, but then, when we start to observe those colors in nature, and say it starts to change the way we see the world. And it sort of separates us from the people around us. So if you go out with some friends on a snowy day and you start to say, wow, look at how blue those shadows are, they're going to look at you like you're some kind of nut. Okay, but that's because you're beginning to see the world as it really is. You're seeing the colors that are there, which most people don't see because they haven't tried to paint them. And when you start to paint something, then you start to discover the truth about something. And so the act of painting isn't just a display of your skill. it's also a process of discovery where we discover things about our subject that we didn't know before. We learn about our subject. We learn about the natural world around us as we paint it. Well, thank you for watching this video, and please subscribe, like, add a comment. All that really helps me to make more videos in the future. But thanks again.